this episode of Being Forward, we speak to Roshan Thiran, founder and CEO of Leaderonomics, a social enterprise that supports and promotes leadership development. Roshan describes what the future of work looks like and why it is important to embrace the current situation and make the best out of what we have where possible. So I know that, the Q2 results are out and the global economy is not looking very story at the moment, and people are a little bit worried that there's going to be another wave of whether it's retrenchment or changes that they have to face. So with that in mind, what does the future of work look like?
Yeah. So and it's such a broad question, right? Because it's going to be different for different aspects and different people and different countries and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, I think many say, this COVID thing has created all kinds of issues. But actually, what COVID, I think, these lockdowns, or depending on where you are and what situation is, it's really accelerated what was going to happen. And I akin it to like the situation we had many years ago, maybe 150 years ago, when cars just came out and people were using horses. And everyone is like, I prefer a horse is better. Ultimately it's about transportation. It's the means. So whether it's when we talk about Industry 4.0, which is the physical changes, which is autonomous robotics and so on, autonomous printing and autonomous driving and 3D printing and so on. That's the physical changes from industrial IR4. But there's also biological changes that happen, right? With genetics, with genome mapping, predictive medicine, and so on and so forth. And then the one that everyone talks about now, which has been accelerated, is the digital pieces, like blockchain, AI, and so on and so forth, right? But these three things are happening at the same time. They're intermorphed as IR4. And on top of that, we have all the issues that are permeating in the world, right? With different sort of governments coming in. We see the Trump administration and Johnson and Boris Johnson and so on and so forth. But I think ultimately the future is going to be defined by a number of things. I think people are still going to be the same. I mean, we are still going to want to have some form of work where we want to find satisfaction in doing stuff. I think where things are going to change is that, there's a lot of transactional work or administrative work that we are doing. And this happened, 100 years ago. A lot of that was minimized, right? I mean, we have rice cookers, we have, we look at how things have changed in the last, 100 odd years, where cooking, where simple stuff becomes automated to some extent. Now, what has happened is we now work. So before this was household chores and so on. Now work is robotics and so on is creeping into that space and saying, let me automate how you do your accounting. Let me automate HR. Let me automate functions that don't make sense. It's administrative. It's tedious. It requires a lot of data analysis and things like data analysis and things that computers can do better than us. We shouldn't be doing. We should be allowing the computers to do. But there are things that the computers don't do as well as us: creativity, communication, interacting, managing. Those things the computers don't do as well as us. And that's where I think work is going to be skewed towards. So that's one aspect of the future of work changing. I think the other aspect that we have to think about is that I think work is going to be changed where companies are starting, before work is time-based, meaning, I'll pay you money and you work for 8 hours a day. Now work is starting to move to be outcome-based, meaning, hey, I'm going to pay you money. Every outcome you achieve, you get a certain amount of money. And this has driven what we call the gig economy, right? That means people are saying, hey, if that's the case, I don't want to work for hours because I'm producing 100 times. My friend is only producing 20. I can get paid more if I go and freelance. And so that whole thing has already happened the last 5 to 10 years. Right. And now with this whole acceleration from COVID, it makes it even more important for companies to be outcome based. So what we will start to see is less people being employed as full-time employees and more people being part of a supply chain or part of a value chain of an organization. And I think you need to find your niche and say, I'm good at this and I specialize in this so that I can go into 10 companies and do the same thing. And be successful doing so. So there's two elements. One is that changing nature of work in itself, but also the other way is organizations are going to change and be a lot more outcome driven rather than time driven. And this is going to change the way we have to perceive what work is going to be and how work is and how we adapt as salary versus, this whole economy of how much you produce is what you get.
Very thought-provoking answers. And obviously what we wanted to find out is what are the skill sets that are actually needed, because you speak to leaders across so many industries.
Yep.
So are there common denominators when it comes to skill set that allow our, my fellow industry colleagues who are perhaps losing their jobs and don't have actually any opportunity within the industry at the moment to temporarily transfer to another industry? So what are the skill sets that you think will be needed moving forward?
So I think, if you think about it, some people told me like, oh, everyone needs to learn coding because that's a very important skill. And I agree, coding is very important. It's an important skill and we want as many people to do. But the reality is it's changing also, right? Meaning in 5 years time, I mean, I remember when I first learned coding, SQL and basic and this is like 30, 40 years ago. Today, none of this, a lot of it is not fully utilized. I mean, we've got C, we've got Java, we've got a whole bunch of advanced programming skills. So I think the biggest skill that you can have is the ability to learn how to learn. Meaning, this is tough to do. Many people say, yeah, I can learn. But the reality with learning is this: we have to learn something, and first, before we learn it, we have to unlearn things. We have to unlearn, and a lot of it is beliefs that are residing in us. And I give you a quick example. In my company, we had to pivot, and we provide education, leadership development for companies, and it's always going to the company, doing face-to-face workshops, and so on and so forth. And to pivot into the digital sphere required us to say, hey, transactions are not going to be big, where they pay us a lot of money to do this 3-day, 5-day thing. It's going to be mini one hour type transactions. Now, just moving that is about unlearning the old ways of doing it and relearning the new ways of being fast, effective, automating a lot of stuff so that you can get a lot more transactions, because these transactions are smaller and smaller value. So you need many of them to be able to replace that big one. So the ability to learn is extremely important. And I think part of it is, the second part is about, I look at a couple of skills now. One is that starting point is the learning skill. The second part is about innovation and creativity. And you cannot be innovative and creative if you don't have a broad base of understanding the world. So which means that you need to start learning many things. I know Steve Jobs talked about this. He said, I went for this class, design sort of class where I'm learning typology. I didn't know how it was relevant, but later I realized, wow, it was very important because design became a huge differentiator for Apple, when he set up Apple. And that's what we need to start thinking. It's not, go study this because that's going to be in demand. Well, the future is going to be very complex in a way that, I was just telling my team, I said, if you think about, you're a finance person, so you know finance, but the best finance person knows IT, because it's about systems, it's about internet, but also the very good guys know business, have very strong business acumen, and also have good people skills. So it's a morphing of, and the same with marketers, right? Marketers need to know technology, marketers need to have good people skills. So you need to, HR, marketing, finance, everything is morphing together. And it's moving in very different verticals from what we knew. Before it's very functional. So what you need to study is to be innovative and creative. And to learn, you need to be learning multiple things. And I think the other big thing that is very important for us to have is problem-solving skills, because I think the future is going to be about solving problems, and the problems may be a myriad of problems from many different areas. Now, if you think about specific skills, I think things like data analysis, again, coding, cognitive ability, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, complex problem solving, those becomes very much more, the other one is time management, because ultimately we'll have a million things hitting us, right? How do we really know how to not just prioritize, multiply, right? Because prioritization means that I'm doing one thing, but I'm not doing another thing. Multiplying means I'm able to do something now that enables me to yield something in the future. So these are all skills that, in a time where we say, hey, I've got time on my hand to learn something. It's not specific technical skills. Yes, I think that's important. But if you know how to learn fast, you're able to jump in. So I've hired many people who come in and say, okay, we have the editorial team that does content, and many of them are not writers, but they have skills in different areas. When they come in, we teach them how to write. We teach them those technical skills, and that's possible. But the key again is the number one thing I told you: the adaptability to learn, unlearn, relearn, and continuously learning new things that are very, very distinct areas and specifically multiple industries or experiences. So I look at that; those are the areas that we need to zoom in on.
Thank you, Roshan. Can I ask, obviously you were talking about your company needing to pivot as well. As an experienced leader, Did you have fear about, wow, perhaps a little bit unknown? How do you manage your fear? Because the reality is a lot of people now are crippled by fear, right? So how do we get past that? What advice would you give?
Yeah, and when we started to analyze this, right? Actually, fear is related to a bit, there's this thing called grief that we have. So what happens is, when we get attached to something, let's say we attach to our job or we attach to the process, what happens is when there's a pivot or there's a separation, what happens initially is that there's a grief. Oh, things are not going to be the same way, and we go into denial, we go into bargaining, we go to anger, we go into sadness, we go into that whole grief cycle. That, I mean, some of in psychology they talk about the grief cycle, but organizations have the same grief cycle that's happening. And what happens is we cannot reattach to something new. Whether it's a new skill, whether it's a new process, and we call this mindset. But what really we need to do is we need to overcome this grief that we have.
How?
And the old way is gone. And this is tough, because ultimately, in my team, I have to say, look, guys, the old way is gone. No, it's not. It's just temporarily. Once this lockdown, once all this COVID thing goes, once we find a vaccine, everything will go back to normal. As I don't think so.
Because how do people, Roshan, but how do people get over that grief?
So it starts with first telling yourself that you are grateful for what has happened. Gratitude is important. And then forgive, right? And say, sometimes you're angry with your boss, you're this and that. You need to forgive. And then after you're grateful and you forgive, then you are now very much more open to embracing something new. That's the grief side. Now, the mindset also has a couple of beliefs that we may have. We may have a very strong belief that, oh, this is the way things can only happen, right? And that can only be changed by experience. So what you need to do if you're a boss is to showcase them that let's try this. And even if you fail, try it again. And after a while, these guys, that belief, because belief is only changed by rituals or experiences. We cannot change belief by someone saying, hey, this is wrong belief. No, we will agree. But when the time comes, we still act that way. So it can only be changed by experience. So what you need to do is do it. You need to try it. It's like it's saying, hey, I can't do video interviews. It's not normal, this and that. But once you try it and you realize, and I've seen this with many of my friends, it's like, hey, no problem. I do this Zoom call and the interview, and it's quite easy. In fact, it's better because now I get to interview a lot more people from around the world. I don't have to wait for them. So, but this happens. That belief can only be changed if you start seeing others doing it. You see you yourself trying it.
Great point.
And that is something that we fail because we sit in a cocoon and we say, no, we can't, and it will never happen because we're not doing it. And when we do it and we realize, yes, it's tiresome and troublesome and painful, but after a while, just like anything, right? Any skill, after a while you learn it, you become good at it, you start using it much more, right? And to me, that those two things, the grief piece and the personal beliefs, need to be eradicated, and the only way is through doing it.
Yeah, great point, Roshan. One of the things that I absolutely love about the business events and hospitality industry is we are all people, right? So we love service, we are able to anticipate really well, and we are just very highly organized people. So from there, I can already pick some of the transferable skill sets that if we were to go into another industry that we could apply. Mm-hmm. However, obviously, like you said, the grief process, we think about the good old days. And then when we go into an industry, it does take a few months of adjustment, perhaps. So what advice would you have when people are adjusting and wanting to make sure that their transferable skill set are appreciated?
Yep. And I always, and this is not just because of what's happening now, but across for the last 30 years, I always kind of I look at the science, right? And if you look at science, our learning curve is always like a curve that goes up and then it sort of plateaus, right? I mean, that's a typical learning curve, and that in engineering they talk about that learning curve, right? Now, if you think about our life and say this is our learning curve, even if we stay in a job for 1-2 years, we sort of plateau at some point in time, unless the job changes in nature. And so what happens is, if we keep doing this, we're doing same, we're actually at a plateau in our life and we're not growing. And, so for me, it's many times I tell people, if you're in a job where you're not learning, go find a new job. Maybe inside your own company or maybe outside, right? But it doesn't matter. But because what happens is, now remember, when you start your new job, what's going to happen? You're going to struggle the first 6 months and you're going to say, I wish I was back at my old job. I shouldn't have left, But past 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, you're like, oh, this is great. And then about 2 years in, you're like, you stop your learning curve, but you're very comfortable. Life is great, everything's great. But you know that you're not learning. and you know you have to move. But the comfort of staying back in that same job versus the pain of starting a new job and learning is there, and you play with this tension, right? And I tell say, look, if you want to be CEO of a company one day, if you want to do great things, if you want to make a dent in the universe, you need to keep doing this, and you need to have pay. And we do this in school. You know, your year one, your year two, your year three. I mean, every year is going to be more challenging and more painful. And always the first 3-4 months of school is always painful because your teacher is new, you're learning new ways and so on, and then you get comfortable and then you move, right? And to me, that's the starting point of all of us saying that we need to start saying to ourselves, and nobody's going to say this to us. You know, when we are at a point where we're not learning, we need to find a way to learn. And when you go into a new industry or a new place or a pivot, right, you can take a lot of things that you have and build on top of it. So if you think about it, right, you grew like this, and now you're plateaued. You don't go back from the start. You actually, from here, you move on, and then you move on, and you move on. So your curve actually goes very high versus somebody else who goes this way and stays in the same job for 20 years, but the job doesn't change. You know, some people can stay in a job for 20 years, but the job keeps changing. You know, they may be a head of an organization, but that job keeps changing every year, and they're learning, and that's okay. I'm not asking you to change jobs. I'm saying is, when you think you're not learning, you need to make the curve go higher. And when you look back, you say, wow, and this is like a comfort zone, right? I'm very comfortable here. But you step out on the courage zone, we're not very comfortable. Then the zone, after a while, right, that courage zone becomes your comfort zone because you get good at it. Then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And as time goes on, you become great, right? And to me, that's all I can say, because nobody can force anyone to want to take that move and take that lead. Yeah. But we must want to do it ourselves. And so,
I totally agree. And I think it's so important to learn something, you know, whether it's every day, every week, every month, something new is always, you know, very intriguing. So on that note, where would you suggest for people to, you know, where would they go to learn new knowledge? Should they go on the internet? Should they go to a library? Should they come onto your website? Do they speak to leaders? What are some of your suggestions?
Yeah. So you know, if you know, one of the things that we did was we looked at a process of how you become a person who really influences, who drives change, who's a change agent, a leader, and so on and so forth. So we call that the science of building leaders. And we started to look at skills. Actually, skills is highly dependent on where you want to be in your life. So let's say my goal is to be the CEO of a company, right? Now, your goal may be to be the prime minister of the country, right? And somebody else's goal is to be the best father or the best mother. Now, all of us have end goals that are different. And the best part is our starting point is different. My starting point might be here, but yours might be higher than me. You know, you may be much more developed than I am. So your starting point and your goal is different. Now, what you need to learn and what I need to learn is completely different, right? So we can say, you know, you need social intelligence skills, you need cross-cultural, new media literacy skills, virtual collaboration skills. We can say all that, but I think the first point you have to ask yourself is, where do I want to go? You know, what's the end goal? And where am I today? So I call this vision clarity and reality clarity, right? Once we have vision clarity, you know, I have clarity on where I want to go. Then I have reality clarity, where I am today. Then I can start having the clarity of what I need to learn and I need to invest in. You know, and you may say, hey, I want to get to be prime minister one day, so I need to have some political savviness. I need to understand this. I need to understand social media because, you know, all these guys are all getting big accounts. But then you say, okay, then how do I learn that? How do I become an influencer? How do I do? Okay, but, you know, if your goal is to become a technical person and go deep into programming, you know, do you really need social media skills? Do you? Maybe not, right? So I don't know what the answer is, but I think if all of us start to explore ourselves and say, what's my vision? What's my reality? And then what do I need to do to get there? Then we start mapping our journey. Then even though there are roadblocks or obstacles, we know at the end of the day, this is where we want to go. We can navigate around it and we can learn new things. The world may change, but, you know, my goal is still the same. I just navigate around those changes. Then we become a lot more successful as a person versus being very stuck. And I see this, you know, oh, we must study IT, we must study this. And then they become programmers, but they have no social intelligence, they have no intellect. You know, it's just programming and they can't do what, you know, even when people say something, you know, when your boss tells you something, they actually mean something else. But we're not able to translate that, right? And when you don't have those capabilities, right, it's going to be very hard for you to be able to be successful. So that's you know my kind of take on that, you know.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, like within a few moments, you have shared so many great points for people to motivate people to to move forward, to embrace that COVID is going to be part of our lives for a while until there's a real solution to it. But we should not stop living. We should stop improving where possible, where money allows. So, Roshan, once again, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we have many other conversations coming. So
happy to have this conversation.